Hello, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you on the next episode of the PFC Public Consultation webinar. And today we're talking about the French forest certification system. My name is Hubert Inhäuser. I'm a technical officer at PFC International, and it's my great pleasure to be your host today. Our agenda has the same three items as we usually have on these webinars. First, I will have a short introduction about PFC in general for those who are not that familiar yet with our system. And then the main highlight of today is the presentation of the French forest certification system delivered by Paul-Emmanuel Huet from PFC France and his team. And at the end, as always, there will be time for clarification questions and, of course, to discuss them. So with this brief introduction, let's start with PFC as a general introduction. The acronym stands for Program for the Endorsement of Forest Certification System. We are an alliance of independent national forest certification systems under the umbrella of PFC International. All of these national forest certification systems are based on PFC's sustainability benchmark standards or international standards like the chain of custody. It's a voluntary mechanism promoting sustainable forest management through independent third-party certification. We are very proud that we are the world's largest forest certification system and provider of 3/4 of the world's certified sustainably managed timber. On this map, you can see our global coverage. It's important to note that the countries you see in dark green, they are PFC members with endorsed operational certification systems, and those which are in light green, they do not have endorsed systems at the moment. It's not that visible on the screen, but it's very important to know that France is an extremely important, valuable member of the PFC family, having more than 2,000 chain of custodies in the country. The new French forest certification system was submitted in June this year for assessment. These assessments are carried out by an independent assessor yet to be appointed. As part of this assessment, we are conducting a 60 days public consultation. If you visit our websites, you can find all related information and resources about this. We open the public consultation today, and we encourage all stakeholders to submit their comments or just take a look at the complete French forest certification system documentation. You have time to submit the comments until 21st of September. All of these comments which are submitted to this during this public consultation will be considered by the external assessor. Again, if you were involved, if you have a say, or you are just interested to take a look at the French documentation, please take a look. You can encouraged to submit your comments until 21st of September. And that was this very brief introduction from my side, and I'm very glad that I have Paul-Emmanuel and his team here with us today. And I stop sharing my screen and hand over the floor to Paul-Emmanuel. Thank you very much, Paul-Emmanuel. The floor is yours. You're muted.
Hi, Herbert. Hi, everybody. Thanks for inviting us to make an overall presentation today of our revision process and the new schemes that we are submitted for assessment to PFC International. I'm going to share my screen. So now you should see it. Can you see my screen?
Yes, it works fine. Thank you.
Great. So thanks again. I'm going to present you the big, I would say, steps that we made through our revision process. and to go into more details about the French Forest Certification Scheme. We are going to have this presentation with the following content. Talk about the French forest context, then go to the standard setting process, the mapping of the French documentation, and then going into more details about Metropolitan France standard, the French Guiana standard, and then the group certification. Let's talk first about the French forest context. Very globally, as you mentioned, Hubert, today in France, we have what we call the Metropolitan France. So you have the map at the screen, and then we have the French Guiana. So I'm going first to talk about the Metropolitan France. So as it is mentioned on the screen today, we do have in France, at the western part of Europe, 17 million hectares of forest, and which covers globally 1/4 of the national territory. And compared to European countries, this is today the 4th largest forest area in the European Union. The place of the forest is very important in France, as I mentioned. And altogether, the forestry and timber industry, what we tend to call the timber and forest sector, do employ today roughly 400,000 people, which is quite important. With a high biodiversity, today the French forest totalizes roughly 200 different tree species, of which 142 are hardwood species. So there is a really large range of forest tree species in France. But the forest is important, and in parallel, there is quite a high fragmented forest in France. Meaning that there are a lot of forest owners. We have in France, in Metropolitan, we are about 70 million of people, and 3.5 million are forest owners. So this is just to highlight the fact that the forest is much fragmented. And 3/4 of the forest is private today in France, and 1/4 is public. So just to give you a range of this context today that we have in France. In terms of harvesting, 40 million cubic meters are harvested roughly every year. You have the different breakdown of fuelwood, lumber, and industrial timber mentioned on the graph. In terms of afforestation rates, the situation is not the same in all the different departments that we have in France, but you can see on the map also the different afforestation rates of the different departments. Yeah, so we have a quite diverse situations. In France today, what is the situation for PFC? PFC represents roughly 5,600,000 hectares, which are PFC forest management certified, which is globally 1/3 of the total metropolitan forest area. So once again, forest in France is important, and the certified part, PFC certified part of the forest is also very important. And those 5,600,000 hectares do represent 76,000 forest owners, participants in the PFC certification system. And as you mentioned previously, Herbert, we are very proud to have those forest owners, participants committed to PFC, but also to have more than 2,000 certificates of chain of custody, by companies, and altogether this represents more than 3,200 company sites which are PFC chain of custody certified today. So France is very, very much committed to certification PFC in terms of forest management, but also in terms of chain of custody for companies. Then we move to the other forest context, talking about French Guiana. Today in French Guiana, so in the center south of America, the forest covers nearly 8 million hectares, which represents 96% of the territory. So basically, each time that we move in French Guiana, we have forest all over us. So it's very impressive. And this is a tropical forest with a exceptional biodiversity, as we all know. And it contains, for instance, more than 1,500 species of tree, and some of them being only observed in this territory, which is French Guiana. So forestry and timber industry is developing, but compared to metropolitan France, it's less developed today. The volume of production is quite low, between 60,000 and 70,000 cubic meter per year. This is developing, but is still quite low compared to what we have in metropolitan France in terms of production. Now talking about the PFC certification context, we today have 2.4 million hectares, which are PFC forest management certified, which represent the totality of what we call the public permanent forest estate. So 100% of this permanent forest estate, which is managed by the ONF, which is a public manager of the state, is today PFC certified, which we are very proud of. 4 loggers are PFC forest management certified, and we have altogether 11 companies that are PFC chain of custody certified in this territory. So now we can move from the forest context in France Metropolitan and in French Guiana to the standard setting process itself. Just to give you an overview about the evolution of the French forest certification system. So we did begin to develop our first standards in 2001, and the first standards were developed at the regional level in France by local entities. And we, at the beginning, had different standards for forest owners and forest loggers. Then to the next revision in 2006, we had a dedicated standard for loggers that became national. So no more regional, but national. In 2012, so we had a new revision and then the development of the standard for French Guiana. So 2012 was the first certification for French Guiana I just presented before. And then we moved from a standard for forest owners to become national, no more regional. Then in 2017, we came up with a single standard for forest owners, loggers, and forest companies. And we decided not to revise the French Guiana standard because we didn't see it was necessary to revise it in terms of evolution. And then, as we are talking today, 2023, we had this fourth revision meeting the new benchmark standard for PFC 1003. Then we had to develop requirements for agroforestry, what we call TOF, trees outside forest. And we decided also to revise fully the French Guiana forest management standard. So now going into details about this revision process, the fourth one. The revision process has been handled by what we call a revision forum. So the forum is the entities that did revise and made all the work of revision of our standards. So the forum is, as an entity, has been composed by 117 stakeholders. So it was a big forum. We wanted it to be as representative as possible and as exhaustive as possible about all the different kind of sensibility that we do have today in the French forest context. So we had those 5 categories of stakeholders. The first one was the forest and silviculture stakeholders with 38 participants, and we had the forest and markets, so representative of all the 4 of the industries and all the markets of the different chain of custodies with 30 structures. Then we have what we call the forest and society with almost 20 different stakeholders. Then we had experts and observers. By experts, we mean people, for instance, such as scientists, such as people working in different schools, making research, and people that are really committed to forestry and that did take some of that time to discuss in the revision forum. And then we had observers such as, for instance, the states, the Ministry of Agriculture, of Environment, and different other people that wanted to participate. And the 3 chamber, what we call the chamber, forest and silviculture, forest and markets, and forest and society, those 3 chambers were the 3 chambers that had some voting power, I would say, to validate the standards afterwards, with 87 voting structures, more than persons, in those 3 chambers. And this forum was in charge of developing the two new standards of sustainable forest management standard for metropolitan France, and another one because French Guiana forest is slightly different, as you can imagine, as metropolitan France. So we decided to do 2 revision process, and those 2 revision process were made by the same forum, one global forum that I presented just before. As a summary of the forum work, the forum itself, with all the stakeholders together, had 8 meetings, which is quite important, from June 2021 with an opening meeting till April 2023, when we got the standards validated after the public consultation. And then you have at the screen the different steps that we moved forward from June 2021 to April 2023. Then we also had some working week in French Guiana. We with the team went to French Guiana for 1 week to meet all the different stakeholders, had some field visits to build the revised new standard for French Guiana, which were very, very useful. We also had working groups with 25 meetings. We decided to work to break down the different forum into 9 thematic working groups based on the 6 sustainable forest management criteria from Helsinki. And then we add another working group talking about planification, forest management, then another working group about trees outside forest, and last but not least, a working group dedicated to French Guiana. So altogether, we had 9 thematic groups that worked through video conference and through meetings from June 2021 to April 2023 to investigate and work into those different fields. We also had some field trips and pilot testing. For instance, as an example, April 2022, we had a field trip in the center of France with a French forest cooperative, a regional natural park, and an NGO to objectify, I would say, the subject of the conversion, which is something that we worked on very, very hard, applied to the French context on the ground. And we also had some pilot field tests for the new trees outside forest annex. We did 2 pilot field tests, one in January and one in April 2023, to make sure that what we proposed as a new annex for TOF was fully adapted to our French context. And then we had a public consultation of 2 months at the beginning of 2023, from January to March. And altogether, we received almost 100 different contributions, which was quite important. Talking now about the mapping of the French documentation. You can see on the screen that in terms of mapping, we have standards and we have administration documents. Talking about standards, we had to work on the group forest certification requirements 102, then 103, talking about the sustainable forest management requirements for Metropolitan France, and then also requirements for French Guiana, because as I mentioned several times in the beginning, we do have 2 different 103 standards, one for Metropolitan France and one for French Guiana. Then we also have 104 rules governing organizations involved in the auditing and certification of sustainable forest management requirements. So up to now, we have this French standard, which is going to be revised after all, as soon as we will receive the new 104 standards from PFC International, which is going to come closely. And then the last 3 standards were those ones fully adopted by PFC, and there are no, I would say, declination at the French context. So standard 2001, 2002, and 2003. 201 talking about the trademark rules, 202 about the chain of custody in forest and tree-based products requirements, and then the 203 about requirements for certification bodies operating certification against chain of custody standard. So those last 3 ones were fully adopted by PFC France. So this slide was talking about the standards. Then we have also, in terms of mapping, the administration documents. You have at the screen all the list of administration documents that we had to review. French Sustainable Forest Management Standard Developments and revision procedures. So this first administration document settle all the rules that we've been through to work on the revised document. So this was a very important procedure that we had to follow alongside all the revision process. Then we have the procedure for dealing with complaints and appeals, chain of custody certification and audits, body authorization procedure, sustainable forest management certification and audit body authorization procedure. Then we have all the trademark licensing contract with different stakeholders, certification gateway entity for group certification, individual forest management organization, then trademark licensing contract with organization holding an individual chain of custody, and the same for multi-site chain of custody certificates. And last but not least, the trademark licensing contract between PFC and retailer and category D user. So we also had to review all those different administration documents. Coming now to the 4th part of this presentation, trying to give you a little more details about the key developments of 1003 for Metropolitan France and for French Guiana. So as I was mentioning before, for us, this revision was the 4th revision of the standard. Talking about the PFC certification in Metropolitan France, this certification applies to private and public forest owners, forest managers, and loggers. And today in France, we only have, in Metropolitan France, we only have group certifications and no individual certification up to now, once again, in Metropolitan France. And today we have 10 groups that are going through group certification with 103. The main challenges of this revision, it's complicated to list all the main challenges because we had quite challenges, but the main one was to meet, of course, the new international requirements of 103 and PMC benchmark, which had quite new requirements, so we had to deal with. We also had to develop, had the different stakeholders wanted PFC France to develop new requirements for trees outside forests and, for instance, agroforestry areas, what we did. And we also had to take into consideration different clarification according to the following of audit results from the last from the current standard. So we had to take into consideration different feedback and experiences that we had on the ground to make sure that the revision process was including those feedback. In terms of new and evolutions, we can talk about the standard structure. Through this revision, we decided to go for high-level standard format, what we call HLS, which is used commonly by ISO and now PFC International, and today the new PFC France standards also has this HLS format. There are different advantages to that, facilitates reading, auditing, and then future revision of standards, and also benchmarking with different countries. For instance, we have when we have to discuss about this new standard with international companies, some of them are very keen to be able to benchmark what is being done in France on a specific topic, on a specific requirement, and what is being done in other countries. So this is also going to be used through this new format. Talking about the operational requirements, now it is organized and structured around 6 criteria of sustainable forest management, known as Helsinki criteria. So in the structure, we go through different requirements through those different criteria that you, I guess, all know. I'm not going to read it. They are on the screen, but everything is based on those 6 Helsinki criteria. And then we have 2 specific appendix in this Metropolitan Standard forest management. The first one is about an appendix on agroforestry, with a new appendix talking about trees outside forest. And the other one concerns core harvesting and specific requirements. In terms of main, I would say, new items, we have forest conversion. Forest conversion, which is mentioned in the PFC benchmark standard in France, and through all the discussions that we had with different stakeholders, it was decided to transpose this forest conversion term and notion into 2 different notions: transformation and forest clearance. And the differentiation of these 2 notions is much better adapted to the context of Metropolitan France. And that is what was needed and asked by the different stakeholders. So as it is mentioned on the slide, transformation and forest clearance are what we call forest conversion in the PFC benchmark standard. I just made a little point about the definitions that we gave to forest clearance and transformation. The forest clearance being the destruction of the forest estate of land and the removal of its forest designation, according to the French Forestry Code. And then the transformation, which is a renewal through planting or sowing in a naturally regenerated forest, with different nodes I'm not going to focus on now, but which give more context and more clarification and details about what is called with the term transformation. Another main point of the revision after conversion is what we call the high ecological value forest zone. This is basically not a new item, but we collectively decided to include a new term, which is high ecological value forest zone. And this is a new concept that provides much greater clarity for participants and different stakeholders and auditors to be able to clearly identify the specific requirements applying to these areas. For instance, now in the current standard, we do have different requirements talking about these specific different areas, but they are spread towards the standard, and it's not always very easy for people, for stakeholders to know what is being done in these different areas, which are areas that are quite sensitive to preserve them. So through this new concept, which definition is mentioned on the slide, now we do refer in several requirements to this same term, which make it much easier for the forest owners and the same for companies and the same for auditors to have a specific look at this notion and what are the requirements connected to these high ecological value forest zones. What we call high ecological value forest zone is 2 points. Point A, which are areas of strong protection as they are defined by a specific French decree, but also a specific forest spaces within the property scale, including remarkable habitats, environments, immediate surroundings of peatlands and ponds, or the wetlands of high conservation value. And there are connected requirements to this high ecological value forest zone concept all around the new 103 standard. In terms of evolution, we also, the forum also took the decision to have a real prohibition without exceptions of use of synthetic herbicides, which is also an evolution and strong commitment made by the different stakeholders. And then last but not least, if we want to summarize, which is a difficult exercise, what is new or what is different in the new standard. So now we have a new annex about trees outside forests, agroforestry and scope. So the French requirement for trees outside forests, they are strictly limited to agroforestry areas. We decided, the forum decided not to go into urban areas as it was possible through the trees outside forest annex. We decided to stick to agroforestry areas because for us it's a new field with new stakeholders, new forest owners, new agriculture people. So we decided to restrict this new scope to the agroforestry areas. And what do we call agroforestry area? For us, we define it as an area where trees are integrated with crops or livestock within the same agricultural production system, land with agricultural statutes, and the trees can be within the same agricultural plot or in the periphery. And for us, in terms of application, the type of areas concerned are therefore essentially hedgerows, as it is mentioned on the different pictures, isolated tree in agricultural plots, are also isolated or aligned poplar groves. So those three different situations are the main situations that are concerned by the extension of the scope through our trees outside forest annex. Just to make it clear, what are the requirements, tractor and pilot testing through agroforestry? PFC France, we didn't define a new specific standard for agroforestry because all the PFC sustainable forest management requirements that we mentioned before in 103 for Metropolitan France do apply to agroforestry area. So this is the first important point. And for 18 of those forest management requirements, the appendix for TOF, for agroforestry, provides a specific interpretation for implementation, particularly in relation of the what we call the PAC in French, or the Common Agricultural Policy, CAP for Europe. So once again, all the requirements do apply to TOF, and 18 of them have specific, I would say, interpretation for the implementation. And for the other requirement, there is an appendix that provides a glossary of different terms that you can refer to very easily in the document. And very important to highlight, we had pilot field tests that were carried out by multi-stakeholder group, a group of roughly the different logos that you can see at the bottom of this slide. So we had about between 5 and 10 stakeholders, which are very important stakeholders in the field of agroforestry in France, that made some pilot tests with us, and we made sure that to get different representative of different groups, and that was very valuable pilot field test that we made in 2023 before adopting our new TOF annex. So now that I made a little summary of the main, I would say, evolution of the 103 Metropolitan France standard, then I wanted to do the same exercise for French Guiana and their key developments. As I mentioned previously, the first standard was adopted 10 years ago, 2012, for French Guiana. And last revision period, 5 years ago, it was decided not to revise the standard, but through this revision, we made a full revision. PFC certification in French Guiana, differently than for France Metropolitan, we do only have individual certification in French Guiana and no group certification. The certification is limited to the permanent forest estate, as I was mentioning to you before. Just as a reminder, 2.4 million hectares are PFC certified there. There is an individual certification of ONF Guyana, which is a manager of the different state forests there, and also we have individual certifications for loggers. So no group certification in French Guiana. What were the different issues that we had to face? We had to go through meeting new international requirements of the PFC benchmark standard, same as all other countries for sure. We also had to integrate specific elements for individual certifications that had to be strengthened in terms of internal audits requirements, documented procedures, and so on. And also, we worked a lot on the integration of reduced impact logging routes as we are talking about a tropical forest with a high sensitivity, this is really important to have a dedicated chapter, I would say, and requirements about what we call reduced impact logging practices and rules. So this is what we done through a specific annex that is strongly connected to the standard itself. Such as the Metropolitan France standard, we decided to go through a high-level standard HLS format for the same reasons. So now the two different 103 standards for France, Metropolitan and Guiana, organized the same way, and the same way as PFC benchmark standard is today through HLS. In terms of operational requirements, we also decided to go through the same process. So all the requirements organized through the 6 Helsinki criteria. And then we had an addition of chapter 9, which structure performance evaluation and internal audit requirements for individual certification in French Guiana. And currently, these topics are only covered by ISO, which is not sufficiently precise and lacks clarity for certified organizations. So we decided to have a global dedicated chapter about all the process going on, performance evaluation and internal audit requirements for individual certifications in this context. I was talking about low impact logging rules. So now we have a new normative appendix. This is very important. This is a normative appendix setting out the rules for low impact logging. It's a normative drafting of the low impact logging charter to facilitate audit activities and also understanding all the requirements for loggers. And this appendix, which is normative, once again, is structured around 7 main principles of low impact logging, adapted, of course, to the French Guiana context. You have the 7 different chapter or principle there. Logging and production areas is optimized by the manager by means of a tree identification inventory. Provision of timber resources in production areas is tailored to the local conditions and general protection needs of the environments. Logging preparatory work, which has to optimize timber and reduce impact. Timber is removed in line with standard logging industry practices, of course, while limiting impact. Log storage, loading, and transport operations are optimized. Fuel wood use does not have any further impacts. So we do take what is given by the logging activity for fuel wood, but we do not make dedicated logging to take fuel wood. And then the waste management is controlled. So finally, all those different chapters are going through the different logging operations from the identification of the tree inventory to the logging operation. Each of these steps has to be limited in terms of impact, and this is what basically is covering this annex. And to finish this presentation, we wanted to make a very little focus about group certification. So we also revised 102 2023 standards, talking about group certification requirements. Today, as I mentioned, in Metropolitan France, we only have group certification, which applies to all certified participants in Metropolitan France. Actually, there are no individual certification, as I was mentioning before, but we do have individual certification in French Guiana. And the group certification applies to different categories of participants today in France, which are forest owners, for sure, forest managers, loggers, which are defined as an individual or legal entity that purchases standing timber from forest owners in order to cut and sell it. So they do have to respect and to respect the different requirements about forest management. and forestry companies, so which are service provider working in the forest. A forest company fells and hauls timber, undertakes forestry works, replanting and forest maintenance work. So those are the different 4 groups that are concerned in terms of group certification requirements. The revision issues, well, meeting the new international requirements of the PFC 102, and also we had a lot of discussions with different stakeholders to take into consideration for sure the French context and the situation that we are facing today with the different stakeholders. So it was also a good opportunity through this revision to take into account our specific French, I would say, economic, social, environmental specific issues about this. And last but not least, in terms of key developments about 102, we had a real focus in this revision about what we call the risk analysis. So we developed specific requirements through this group certification. So all together with the internal audit and group monitoring activities, which are now, everything is based on risk analysis, which is a vertebral column of all the work that we have to do in 102, and also assessment of sustainable forest management risk by each group, certified group in its area of responsibility, which includes general risk common to all the groups, but also specific risk connected to the area and linked to the implementation of the sustainable forest management standard. So risk analysis is a very important stage of this revision about group certification, and it's connected to quite a lot of requirements for the group certification. So this is the end of my presentation. I'm very glad to have been able to present you the main, I would say, developments of the revision. Very happy with my team, Geoffroy and Sandra, who are there to have worked on this revision with them, and to have been able to, through 2 years' work, to involve more than 100 stakeholders, as I was mentioning to you before. So it was a very hard revision, a lot of discussions, but very, very happy to have been able to present you those main developments. So happy to answer questions if you have, and I give you back the floor, Herbert.
Thank you very much, Paul, for this very focused presentation. I think it's very difficult to compress all the 2 years' work in such a short presentation. So I think that we could go on for much longer, but I think that this was really an excellent selection of the main highlights, what you did over the last 2 years. I think that you're absolutely right that now we have time for some clarification questions. Again, as I mentioned, that on the PFC website, the complete French documentation is available for detailed search or information collection if anybody is interested. Until we have maybe some questions from the floor, I think just a question what I have from my side to you is maybe to, I think it was an excellent choice to limit and focus the trees outside forest requirements to this agriculture, agroforestry setup. And I just wanted to maybe ask you that, did you already receive market demand? It was more responding to it, or you feel it more like this was a more comfort zone to start the requirements interpretation, and then you will see how it's going to be appreciated by those who are potentially interested in this?
Thank you, Robert, for this very important question. We had a lot of discussion about that. The different stakeholders decided to move forward with this new scope, with a limited scope, as I mentioned, because basically today there is more and more demand about, for instance, timber coming from hedgerows for energy. And connected to this demand for energy coming from biomass, from turf, We do all know that there are also quite a lot of challenges in terms of social and environmental issues connected to this, I would say, biomass. And so people really wanted to say that PFC was relevant in the forestry sector to manage this kind of aspects, social, economic, and environmental, and therefore there was a high demand that PFC also takes this kind of challenges, but outside forest and also in those agricultural and agroforestry areas. So this was basically the start of the demand. So it was really, PFC is really seen as a player, I would say, that is able to manage according to its experience in forest, that is able now to extend and tackle the different issues that we can have also on agroforestry, sorry, spaces, according to the experience that we have in the forest, and taking and trying to tackle the different challenges that are also that we also have on this kind of agricultural spaces.
No, thank you very much. I think this makes a lot more clear about the context, because I assume that this is maybe a possibility then to link it with the RED 2 requirements, or maybe feeding into some of these additional processes as well.
Exactly.
All right, excellent. I don't see any other questions from the floor. I'm not surprised. I will watch the webinar myself again to go through the details you presented. So I think at this point, I would like to thank everyone who joined us today, and particularly to you, Paul Emmanuel, and your team to putting this presentation together. And again, just maybe to repeat to everyone that we are very happy to have your views on the French forest certification system by 21st of September. With this, thank you very much again, and I wish you a lovely rest of the day.
Thank you very much to everybody, and thank you, Robert. Have a nice, and thank you to my team also that we worked on this presentation. So thanks everybody, and have a nice day and week.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Goodbye.
you. Bye-bye.